The Boy Frog. Once upon a time, there was a strange little child who lived near a peaceful village. He was swampy and wild and warty, and everyone called him Frog Boy, which he seemed to like just fine. The villagers reckoned that he must have had a real name at some point. Surely his parents had given him one, but he'd left home years before, and try as they might, no one had been able to send him back. Frog Boy just loved living in the swamp. Frog Boy spent his days in the wet and wild of the woods. He ate plants and bugs and wore clothes stained all brown and green from the swampy water. Every so often, he'd wander into the village to say hello, and even though he smelled like mud and left a cloud of dirt everywhere he went, he was friendly enough. The villagers let him rule over his little patch of woods. But one day, when he got older, they warned him to stay away from the old forest beyond the hills. "But, why should I stay away from there?" Frog Boy asked. "The woods are like my living room. An old forest would fit me like a worn-in pair of shoes." "Don't test it, kid," said the village baker, waving a fat floured finger. "There's a witch in those woods, and she does not take kindly to little runts like you trespassing in her trees." "Whoa, a witch?" said Frog Boy, eyes wide as eggs. "I'll definitely stay away from her." "There you go, that's a good boy," said the baker. "Now back up, you're getting moss in my dough." Frog Boy went back to the woods, but after that, the witch was all he could think of. He'd been warned by the baker and others, but to a strange little kid like Frog Boy, a warning might as well have been an invitation. "A witch and old Frog Boy," he said to himself, climbing over the rocky hills and heading into the old forest. Witches love frogs, and she'll definitely love me." The grimy boy pushed deeper into the forest, and soon he found a winding path lined with strange, sharp flowers, all colored in poison greens and blues and pinks. He followed the path, unafraid and whistling, until he came upon a squat stone cottage. It was overgrown with skeletal tendrils of climbing thorns, but puffs of silver smoke chugged from the chimney. "Nice, looks like she's home," he said. "Oh, look, and she's put out a snack for visitors." Near the front door was a little bowl all full of rotting food. Buzzing around it were the biggest, juiciest flies that Frog Boy had ever seen. Licking his lips, he plucked one from the air with a well-practiced snatch and popped it into his mouth. It was as delicious as he'd hoped, and he munched it happily. A second later, the cottage door burst open, and a gnarled little witch stomped into the yard. "What do you think you're doing?" she shrieked. "You just ate Keith!" "What? Keith?" "He was my favorite pet fly!" "Oh, I'm sorry," Frog Boy said. "Well, if it's any consolation, he was delicious." "Why, you little brat!" the witch spat, pulling out a wand of wood nearly as gnarled as she was. "You like eating flies?" "Oh, I love eating flies," Frog Boy said, oblivious to the fury in the witch's voice. "Then I'll make sure flies are all you eat. Flies and bugs will be your dinner, and the swamp will be your home. Cursed! Cursed you'll be until you get a kiss from a princess, which will never happen when you look like this. Ah!" She waved her hand, and Frog Boy felt a twist and saw a flash, and the next thing he knew, the witch and her cottage were gone, and he was alone, sprawled out on a lily pad, his long, slimy legs bent beneath him. "What?" he croaked, looking down to see mottled green skin and big webbed hands. Looking up, the forest towered above him. Had he shrunk? A fly flew by, and he went to snatch it out of the air, and a long tongue shot out and pulled it back into his wide, rubbery mouth. "Oh, that witch," he mumbled as he munched. I think she turned me into a frog." He sat there, chewing the fly and thinking about it long and hard. "This is awesome," he said, jumping for joy into the murky water of the swamp. Frog Boy, the boy frog, had always been a frog at heart, and now he was a frog in body as well. He spent his days much as he had before, all swimming and hunting bugs and plants, but now he could cut through the water with his webbing and catch flies with his tongue. He didn't need nearly as many as before to be full, and when he went to town to visit, no one tried to tell him he smelled or encourage him to take a bath or wear clean clothes. Frog Boy was living his best life, and in his mind, the witch had given him a mighty gift. Thinking about the witch, he decided he should go and thank her. He was smaller now, but his hops were long and mighty, so he made good time over the hills. Unfortunately, when he found the clearing that had held the witch's cottage, there was nothing there anymore but a little pond all choked with lily pads and water weeds. It was alive with clouds of mosquitoes and fat horseflies and tiny minnows all stirring through the muck. Most people would have gagged at the very sight of it, but to Frog Boy, it looked like home. He lived there for months and months, eating and swimming and just enjoying his life more than he ever had before. He was relieved to see that the witch's spell seemed quite permanent, since there were never any princesses around in this part of the forest, or princes either, for that matter. Frog Boy wasn't sure if a kiss from a prince would end the spell too, but it seemed safer to avoid all royalty just in case. This seemed like a pretty easy task, until one day. Frog Boy, the boy frog, was hopping through the forest, looking for some butterflies to munch, when he heard a distant scream. He listened for a moment, and then he heard the steely ring of battle crash through the air. He hopped closer, curious to take a look. Not a lot really happened in his little patch of pond, which is how he liked it, so anything strange bore investigation. As he got closer, he could hear voices shouting, and the shing, smash, thunk of swords hacking at shields. Through the waving reeds, he suddenly saw knights in a frenzied fray. There were 4 in all, riding horses and slashing at each other. 2 wore white armor, golden crowns on their shields, and 2 were in blue plate, long checkered blue and white capes streaming down their backs. "Whoa!" said Frog Boy, who had only ever heard stories of knights and had never seen any in real life. "So cool!" The white knights had clearly been ambushed. One had arrows sprouting from his shield, and the other's horse was frothing and collapsed as Frog Boy watched. "Protect the princess!" a knight cried as his horse fell on his leg, pinning him to the ground. "Oh, princess?" Frog Boy croaked, suddenly terrified. Knights in battle were one thing, but a princess? If she should happen to kiss him, he'd turn back into a boy, and that was the last thing he wanted. "Princess!" called the white knight still on his horse. The crown painted on his shield had been hacked to pieces. "Ride! I'll hold them off!" From the trees, a young woman on a horse of her own burst onto the trail. She was wearing leather riding gear, and a long ponytail streamed behind her as she urged her horse away through the forest. She had barely disappeared from sight when a blue knight brought down his sword with both hands, smashing the white knight's shield to splinters. The other blue knight rang a high hit off the white helmet of his foe, and he tumbled senseless to the mud. "White knights," sneered a blue, pointing with his sword. "The princess will be ours, and your king will pay a goodly ransom for her." "Enough," said the other. "They're done. Let's go get the princess before she's lost in the woods." The 2 blue knights turned their horses and galloped after the princess, leaving the 2 white knights moaning in the mud. Frog Boy started hopping after the attackers. He didn't want anything to do with princesses. He wanted to stay a frog and live his life, but he couldn't just let them kidnap her. From what it sounded like, this princess hadn't done anything to deserve a kidnapping except be born, and Frog Boy knew how hard that could be. Cutting through the swamp, Frog Boy, the boy frog, got in front of the would-be kidnappers, the blue bandits. He could hear them pounding up the trail, and he knew he had to stop them, but he was only a frog. What could he do? Think, he said, eating a passing fly as it bumbled by. There's gotta be something. Suddenly, he spied a slithering snake. Many snakes eat frogs, but the snakes around his pond had learned that Frog Boy was a special case. Hey, snake, he called. I saw a big fat mouse on the trail over there. Ooh, a mouse? Hissed the snake. Fat, you say? Is it juicy sweet? Oh, definitely, said Frog Boy, and then one of the blue knights pounded past. But quick, he's getting away! The snake shot into the trail just ahead of the second knight. The horse saw the poisonous green stripes and the flicking tongue and reared up in terror. The knight held on and kept his saddle, but then the horse turned and fled into the woods. A low tree branch crunched into the blue helmet, and the bandit went sprawling on the ground. One down, said Frog Boy. One more to go. He dove into the swampy waters of his pond, cut to the far side, and then popped out of the water near the princess. She had come to what seemed to be a dead end, nothing but boggy clumps of grass and dark water on all sides. Behind, the other blue knight was galloping closer. Frog Boy gave a mighty leap, shooting from the water to land on the front of the saddle in front of the princess. Listen, don't kiss me, he said at once. A talking frog? Said the princess, eyes wide. How can you talk? Okay, there's no time to explain. Also, why would I kiss you? I'm in the middle of something. Because I'm about to save your life, he said. See that clump of grass to the side over there? Ride towards it. Into this swampy pond? I'll sink. Dude, just trust me. Behind the princess came the bellow of the blue knight, and the singing ring of his armor and sword as he rode over the trail, closer and closer. Well, I guess I don't really have any other choice, she said, and she urged her horse into the water. The mount resisted for a moment, but it was well trained, and soon she had him moving forward. The horse sank up to his ankles, then his knees, but no deeper. Wait, how are we not underwater right now? The princess asked. There's an old trail under the surface here, Frog Boy said. It's like this crooked stone path that used to lead to a tower that sank into the swamp. Frog Boy had found it in his exploring. The tower was no more than a pile of bricks where crabs made their homes, but the stone pathway was still standing firm under the muddy surface. Here, he said, hopping up to the horse's head. Turn left here and head for that tree. The princess turned and turned and turned again at Frog Boy's direction, winding her way deep into the pond but never sinking below her horse's knees. There you are, snarled the blue knight on the swampy shore. Come with me and maybe we'll let you ride instead of throwing you over your mount like a sack of grain. Come and get me, the princess threw back. The knight saw her, deep in the water, horse not sinking, and reasoned that the swamp wasn't as deep as it seemed. With a shout and a spur, he urged his horse into the water. A second later, he was sinking, the water dropping off to be deeper than the mount's neck. I don't understand, he shouted. Help! Help! His armor pulled him down below the surface, and the scummy water closed over him in a torrent of bubbles. Take another turn and ride hard, Frog Boy shouted at the princess. It'll take us back to your white knights. The princess nodded fiercely, turning back once more to see the blue knight clawing his way to shore, sputtering and coughing, water and minnows pouring out of his armor. Frog Boy guided the princess back through the trees and to the white knights. They found the men back on their feet, warming up their horses and preparing to ride. Princess, said the taller of the two, you've made it back. How did you get away? This frog helped me, she said, gesturing to where Frog Boy the boy frog rode on her horse's head. A frog? No problem, gents, said Frog Boy, throwing in a little wink. Happy to help out. A talking frog? Exclaimed one. Like the stories, said the other. Princess, this must be an enchanted prince. Give him a kiss and surely he will take on his human form. Oh, I guess I could. Would you like that, Sir Frog? She asked, peering down at Frog Boy. I could give you a kiss and make you a prince, and then you could live at the castle and maybe even rule the kingdom with me one day. My parents would give you silk robes and feather beds and the finest food in the land. Surely that's like a good enough reward for helping me out today, right? Oh, that's super nice, but, no thanks, said Frog Boy without a second thought. He loved who he was, and he had no interest in changing for a princess in a castle. Oh, well, are you sure? Now I kind of want to kiss you anyway. You seem pretty cool and brave and stuff, and it would be fun if you turned into a prince and then we could hang out. No, really, it's fine. I just really like being a frog and, living in my pond. Oh, well, okay. I definitely won't kiss you if you don't want me to. Thanks. I really appreciate it, said Frog Boy. You could, come see me at the pond, though, if you wanted. I want to stay a frog and everything, but I wouldn't mind, being friends. The princess smiled and said sure, and then the two new friends made plans to have a visit the next week. Afterwards, Frog Boy, the boy frog, leapt off the horse and into the nearby water, brainstorming what snacks he could provide to his guest the following week. Do princesses like flies? He wondered. Later on, after he'd arrived at home, he thought of what he'd turned down that day. He could have been a prince, with silk robes and feather beds and the finest food and all the rest. Had he made the wrong decision? Ha! No way! What more do I need? He said to himself after a moment. The mud is my silk, and the lilies are my feather beds, and flies, he snatched one out of the air with his long, froggy tongue, are the finest food I've ever had. And he lived happily ever after. The end. Thanks for listening.